People talk about a broken mating bond like it's a romantic tragedy, some grand theatrical event. It's not. It's a biological eviction. When Arthur, a man who owned half the city and my entire nervous system, stared at the floor and said he was moving his first love into our home, I didn't scream. I didn't throw his expensive scotch at the wall. I just felt the invisible tether between us snap, leaving a cold, rotting void in my chest. This is what happens after the billionaire fairy tale abruptly ends. The first sign that my life was over wasn't a text message or a lipstick stain on a collar. It was a smell. In the Omegaverse, biology doesn't let you lie. You can wear all the bespoke Tom Ford suits in the world. You can smile for the cameras and manipulate the stock market, but your scent will always rat you out. Arthur usually smelled like cedar and petrichor, a sharp, grounding storm. I used to bury my face in his neck after a long day just to breathe him in and feel the heavy, thrumming hum of his alpha presence settle my frayed nerves. On a Tuesday, in late October, he walked into our penthouse, and the storm was gone. He smelled like stale vanilla and bruised orchids. I was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands. I didn't get up to greet him. The scent hit the back of my throat, thick and cloying, and my stomach instantly dropped into a cold, bottomless pit. It was a smell I knew from old photographs and offhand comments, from a ghost that had haunted the corners of our 3-year relationship. Tristan. Arthur took off his coat. He didn't look at me. He draped the wool over the back of a dining chair, the movement stiff, calculated. He walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and drank it neat. "You're home late," I said. My voice sounded entirely normal. That surprised me. "Traffic on the bridge," Arthur replied. He set the glass down. The heavy crystal made a dull thud against the marble. "Right." I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. "Did the traffic smell like orchids?" Arthur froze. His broad shoulders tensed under his dress shirt. For a long, suffocating minute, the only sound in the penthouse was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant, muffled sirens of the city 70 floors below. When he finally turned to face me, his eyes, usually a warm, piercing amber, were shuttered. "Tristan is in the city," Arthur said. Flat, direct, no padding. I gathered. "He called me this afternoon. He was at the clinic on 5th. His mate left him, Leo. He's sick. His bond broke entirely, and his body is rejecting the separation. He has nowhere to go, no money, nothing." I watched Arthur's jaw work. He was angry. Not at me, but at the situation. At the injustice done to a man he hadn't touched in 5 years. And in that anger, I saw the absolute, terrifying truth. Arthur was a protector. It was baked into his DNA, a billionaire who fixed broken companies and broken people. But I wasn't broken when he found me. Tristan was. Tristan had always been the delicate, tragic, beautiful thing Arthur couldn't save the first time around. "So you brought him a check," I said, testing the waters. "I paid his medical bills." Arthur rubbed a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. "And I told him he could stay in the guest wing, just until he's stabilized." The words hung in the air. The guest wing. Under our roof. The mating gland at the base of my neck gave a sharp, violent throb. A physical protest. An Omega's biology demands a secure nest. Bringing a distressed, unbonded Omega into a mated pair's territory is an act of sheer biological hostility. Arthur knew this. He had to know this. "You invited your ex-fiancé to live with us." I set my mug on the coffee table. My hands were shaking, just a little. I clasped them together in my lap. "Without asking me, it's temporary, Leo." Arthur took a step toward me, putting a hand out. The scent of vanilla flared, clinging to his skin, suffocating his natural cedar. I flinched back. He dropped his hand, his expression hardening. "Don't do that. Don't make this into something it isn't. He's sick. I am providing resources. You have a dozen empty properties in this city alone, Arthur. You own a hotel chain. You could put him in a penthouse with private nursing staff." I stood up. My legs felt like lead. "But you didn't. You brought him here." Why? Arthur didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor, then at the panoramic window overlooking the glittering skyline. Because he asked for me. Because he's terrified. And what about me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. The desperation in it made me sick to my stomach. I hated the sound of my own voice. Arthur finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke the tether. There was pity. There was guilt. But there was no hesitation. He had already made his choice. He just hadn't realized it meant losing me. He thought I would bend. He thought I would play the understanding mate, smoothing down the edges of his messy, unresolved past. "Leo, please," Arthur said, his voice dropping to that low, commanding alpha register that usually made my spine melt. Now, it just made me cold. "Be reasonable. I'm not choosing him over you. I am managing a crisis." "No," I said quietly. "You're fixing your biggest regret." I walked past him. He didn't try to stop me. I went into our bedroom, my bedroom, and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. I didn't pack the bespoke suits he bought me. I didn't pack the watch that cost more than my college tuition. I packed 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters, my worn-out sneakers, and my laptop. It took exactly 10 minutes. 3 years of my life. A bond that I thought was permanent, reduced to a single bag and a toothbrush. When I walked back into the living room, Arthur was still standing by the bar. He stared at the duffel bag as if it were an alien artifact. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his scent spiking with sudden, sharp distress. The cedar finally fought through the vanilla, smelling like burnt wood. "Leaving." "Leo, stop. This is ridiculous." He closed the distance between us, grabbing my forearm. His grip was tight, desperate. "You are my mate. You live here. I was your mate." I looked down at his hand, then up into his eyes. "You brought another Omega's scent into my nest. You prioritized his comfort over my biological safety. You broke the contract, Arthur. I'm not staying here to watch you fall back in love with a ghost." I pulled my arm out of his grasp. He let me go. He always let things go when they fought back too hard. It was his greatest flaw. If I had cried, if I had begged, maybe he would have stayed. But I was pragmatic to a fault. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped in. I didn't look back as the doors closed, sliding shut on the man who promised me forever, only to trade it away the second his pass called. The withdrawal hit 3 days later. They don't teach you about the physical toll of a severed bond in health class. They give you a pamphlet. They tell you to hydrate. They don't mention that it feels like someone is systematically pulling your veins out through your teeth. I was living in a 3rd-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the corner bodega sold heat suppressants from behind bulletproof glass. The apartment was a shoebox, smelling eternally of damp drywall and old frying oil. It was exactly what I could afford on the meager savings I had scraped together before Arthur moved me into his glass castle. On the 3rd night, the fever spiked. I lay on a mattress on the floor, shivering so violently my teeth clicked. My body was screaming for Arthur. The mating gland on my neck was swollen, hot to the touch, and pulsing with a dull, relentless agony. Every time I closed my eyes, I could smell him. Cedar and rain. I'd reach out, expecting to feel the solid, warm mass of his chest, and my hand would hit the cold plaster of the wall. It's like losing a limb. The brain keeps sending signals to a connection that no longer exists, resulting in a phantom pain that drives you half insane. Cole, the beta who managed the building and worked the graveyard shift at a nearby logistics firm, found me the next morning. I had dragged myself to the hallway to check the mail and passed out against the radiator. I woke up on my mattress, a wet towel on my forehead. Cole was sitting on an overturned milk crate, smoking a cigarette out the cracked window. "You look like hell," Cole said, not bothering to turn around. He blew the smoke into the gray morning air. "Feel like it," I rasped. My throat felt like sandpaper. "You're a bonded Omega going through spontaneous separation." Cole flicked the ash. "You need a doctor, man. Or you need your alpha." "I don't have an alpha." Cole finally looked at me. His face was lined, cynical, the kind of face that had seen every flavor of human misery and found it boring. Right. Well, your biology begs to differ. If you don't get suppressant shots, your core temperature is going to cook your organs. I can get you the cheap stuff. Under the counter. It'll stop the fever, but it'll make you feel like you're walking underwater. Get it, I said. For the next 3 months, I lived underwater. The suppressants were brutal. They flattened everything. The pain dulled to a constant, heavy ache in my bones, but they also took my appetite, my energy, and my sense of smell. The world became a gray, tasteless place. I got a job as a data entry clerk at a mid-level shipping company. It was mindless, quiet work. I sat in a cubicle typing numbers into a spreadsheet for 8 hours a day. I ate plain toast. I drank tap water. I existed. Meanwhile, Arthur lived. It was impossible to avoid him. Arthur Pierce wasn't just wealthy, he was an institution. He was on the cover of Forbes. He was in the society pages. And now he wasn't alone in those photos. I saw the first picture 2 months after I left. It was a candid shot taken outside a charity gala. Arthur in his sharp tuxedo looking stoic and imposing, and clinging to his arm, looking up at him with wide, fragile eyes, was Tristan. Tristan was exactly as beautiful as the rumors suggested. Spun gold hair, porcelain skin, a delicate frame that looked like it would shatter if you spoke too loudly. In the photo, Arthur had a hand resting protectively over Tristan's hand on his arm. I stared at the newspaper, abandoned in the break room, for a long time. My chest didn't hurt. The suppressants made sure of that. But my mind was sharp, and the cynical voice inside my head laughed. There it is, I thought. The billionaire and his fragile little bird. It was the perfect narrative. The media ate it up. They spun a story of a tragic separation and a destined reunion. I was entirely erased. The mysterious partner Arthur had kept out of the limelight quietly scrubbed from the narrative. I threw the newspaper in the trash. I wasn't going to be the tragic ex. I refused to pine. I went back to my desk, finished my spreadsheets, and went home to my shoebox. I paid my rent. I paid Cole for the suppressants. I survived. But survival isn't living, and biology is a patient, ruthless debt collector. The cheap suppressants were a band-aid on a bullet wound. By the 4th month, the tremors started in my hands. The dull ache in my neck sharpened into stabbing pains. My body was adapting to the chemicals, rendering them useless. You need to get the bond surgically severed, Cole told me one evening as I was leaning over the kitchen sink, trying to breathe through a wave of nausea. It costs 20 grand, I said, gripping the cheap metal of the sink. And it has a 40% chance of causing permanent nerve damage. And not doing it has a 100% chance of killing you. Cole crossed his arms. Swallow your pride. Call the billionaire. Make him pay for it. It's the least he owes you for tossing you out. He didn't toss me out, I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. I left. Same difference, Leo. He broke the nest. He pays the bill. I shook my head. No, I don't want his money. I don't want anything from him. I meant it. I wanted a clean break. I wanted to fade into obscurity and let Arthur play house with his fragile first love. But fate, much like biology, has a terrible sense of humor. I picked up a second job. The data entry paid the rent, but I needed the surgery and I was determined to pay for it myself. I found weekend work with a high-end catering company. They liked Omegas for these gigs. We were perceived as docile, polite, good for blending into the background and holding trays of expensive champagne. It was humiliating, but it paid double my hourly rate at the shipping firm. The event was an art auction at a gallery in the financial district. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and a guest list that comprised the top 1% of the city. I was stationed near the back, instructed to keep the glasses full and my mouth shut. The uniform was a stiff white shirt, a black vest, and a collar that ironically hid the swollen mating gland on my neck. I was doing fine. I was invisible. Until the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't a literal drop in temperature, but a heavy, atmospheric shift. The chatter of the room dulled. I didn't need my ruined sense of smell to know who had just walked through the double mahogany doors. The alpha aura rolled into the room like a physical wave. Arthur. I stiffened, gripping the silver tray of champagne flutes so hard my knuckles turned white. I stepped back, sliding behind a massive abstract sculpture, praying to any god that would listen that I wouldn't be seen. From my vantage point, I watched them. Arthur looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his hair styled flawlessly, but his posture was rigid. The relaxed, confident arrogance I used to love was gone, replaced by a tense, hyper-vigilant stiffness. He looked like a soldier in a minefield, not a billionaire at a party. Tristan was at his side. He wore a stunning, backless silk shirt. He looked healthy, radiant even. The tragic dying Omega routine seemed to have completely vanished. Tristan smiled at a passing couple leaning into Arthur's space, projecting the perfect image of a bonded pair. But as I watched, my cynical eye caught the details. When Tristan touched Arthur's arm, Arthur's jaw clenched. It was a micro-expression, a tiny tightening of the muscles, but I knew Arthur's face better than I knew my own. He didn't lean into the touch. He endured it. I frowned, a sudden sharp spike of confusion cutting through the haze of the suppressants in my system. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? The love of his life returned to him. Why did Arthur look like a man walking to his own execution? "Trey, please." A harsh whisper snapped my attention away. The floor manager, a stressed beta, glared at me. "Take this to the VIP section by the north wall. Now." My stomach plummeted. The north wall was exactly where Arthur and Tristan had stopped to speak with a gallery curator. "I can't," I rasped. "Please switch me. Send someone else." "Do it, or you're fired," the manager hissed, shoving me slightly. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I couldn't lose the job. I was $3,000 away from affording the down payment on the surgery. I nodded, keeping my head down, and walked toward the north wall. "Blend in," I told myself. "You are the furniture." I approached the group from the side. I kept my eyes firmly fixed on the polished marble floor. I extended the tray. "Champagne?" I murmured, keeping my voice as flat and uninteresting as possible. The curator took a glass. Tristan reached out, a delicate hand wrapped in a gold Cartier bracelet lifting a flute. "Thank you," Tristan said. His voice was airy, sweet. "Arthur, darling?" Tristan prompted. I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of Arthur's gaze before he even moved. The air between us seemed to crackle. For a second, the heavy dose of suppressants failed, and I caught a singular, overwhelming wave of Arthur's scent. It wasn't the stale vanilla from months ago. It was cedar, completely scorched. Panic. Absolute, unadulterated panic. I couldn't help it. I looked up. Arthur stared at me. His amber eyes were wide, the pupils blown dark despite the bright gallery lights. The glass of scotch he held in his hand tilted precariously. "Leo?" Arthur breathed. The word barely made it past his lips. Tristan stopped mid-sip. He slowly lowered his glass, his eyes darting between Arthur and me. The sweet, airy demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness. Tristan's scent spiked. Pure, aggressive orchid. It was territorial. It was a threat. "Who is this?" Tristan asked, though his eyes told me he knew exactly who I was. "Nobody," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was battering against my ribs. "Just the waiter. Excuse me." I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't run, though every instinct in my body screamed at me to sprint out the back doors. I made it 10 feet before a large hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Leo." Arthur's voice was a low, desperate growl. He spun me around, uncaring of the tray I held or the stares of the surrounding guests. We were standing in the middle of the gallery, the silence radiating outward from us. I looked at his hand on my shoulder, then up at his face. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He looked hollowed out. "Let go of me, Mr. Pierce," I said evenly. Arthur flinched at the formal address. You're working here? What are you wearing? You look..." He scanned my face, taking in the hollows of my cheeks, the dark circles under my eyes. "You look terrible. You're sick." "I'm working." I corrected, pulling my shoulder out of his grip. The phantom ache in my neck flared into agonizing pain at the proximity. And I'm perfectly fine. Now return to your date before he causes a scene. I glanced past Arthur. Tristan was standing exactly where we left him, but his expression was murderous. The mask had slipped entirely. "Leo, please, we need to talk," Arthur pleaded, stepping into my space, trying to envelop me in his scent, trying to soothe a bond that was currently shredding my nervous system. "Where have you been? I tried to find you. You closed your accounts. I didn't know—" "You didn't know what?" I cut him off, the cynicism finally boiling over into quiet fury. "You didn't know that throwing your mate at Omega out for your ex would have consequences? Save it, Arthur. I have tables to serve." "I didn't throw you out." Arthur stepped closer, his voice cracking. "I was trying to keep you safe." I froze. The words hung between us, bizarre and completely out of place. Keep me safe? Before I could demand an explanation, Tristan materialized at Arthur's elbow, his delicate fingers wrapping around Arthur's bicep with an iron grip. "Arthur," Tristan said, his voice laced with venom masquerading as concern. "People are staring. Let the poor boy do his job." Arthur looked at Tristan, and for a split second I saw it. The billionaire, the alpha who bowed to no one, looked trapped. I didn't finish my shift. The floor manager intercepted me before I even reached the service doors. He didn't have to say the words. I handed him my catering apron, took my coat from the staff locker, and walked out the back exit into the freezing November air. The alleyway smelled like wet asphalt and rotting vegetables, a stark, grounding contrast to the stifling perfume of the gallery. I leaned against the brick wall, pulling cold air into my lungs. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get my phone out of my pocket. The brief proximity to Arthur had triggered a violent relapse in my nervous system. The heavy dose of cheap suppressants in my bloodstream was currently going to war with my biology, and my biology was winning. The mating gland on my neck pulsed with a hot, toxic ache. The heavy steel door of the gallery slammed open. "Leo!" I didn't look up. I just squeezed my eyes shut. "Go back inside, Arthur. I don't have the energy for this." Footsteps echoed against the pavement, fast and hard. He didn't stop until he was less than 2 feet away. I could feel the heat radiating off him. I could smell the burnt cedar, thick with distress. "You're shaking," Arthur said. His voice lacked its usual commanding resonance. It was thin, threaded with a quiet horror. "It's November. I forgot my scarf." "Don't lie to me." He reached out, his large hands hovering just inches from my arms, wanting to touch but terrified of the reaction. "You look completely emaciated. You're working a service job. Why didn't you touch the accounts? I left the joint cards open. I transferred funds." "I don't want your money," I snapped, finally looking at him. The street lamp above us flickered, casting harsh, yellow shadows across Arthur's face. Up close, the damage was undeniable. The immaculate suit couldn't hide the hollows of his cheeks or the dark, bruised exhaustion under his amber eyes. He didn't look like a man who had been happily reunited with his first love. He looked like a man being slowly poisoned. "You're punishing me," Arthur whispered, dropping his hands. "I understand that. You have every right to hate me, but you can't punish yourself, Leo. You need medical care. You're going through bond withdrawal without supervision." "I have it handled." "You look like you're dying." "Then let me die in peace." The words hung in the frigid air. Arthur flinched as if I had struck him across the face. For a moment, the billionaire facade crumbled entirely, leaving behind something utterly broken. "I won't let you do that," Arthur said, his jaw tightening. "I'm calling my driver. I'm taking you to the private clinic in Midtown. They can stabilize you." "I'm not going anywhere with you." I pushed off the wall, attempting to step around him. Arthur moved to block my path. It was an instinctual alpha maneuver, a physical barricade meant to corral a distressed mate. But I wasn't his mate anymore. My patience snapped. I shoved him hard in the chest. "Move!" I snarled. The physical contact was a mistake. The friction of my hand against his chest sent a jolt of raw, unfiltered electricity straight down my spine. My knees buckled. I didn't hit the pavement. Arthur caught me instantly, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. Leo, his scent surrounded me, a suffocating blanket of cedar and desperation. My body betrayed me instantly. For 4 months I had starved it of this exact contact. My head fell back against his shoulder, and a humiliating, involuntary whine tore from my throat. The pain in my neck dulled for the first time in weeks, replaced by a dizzying rush of relief. "I've got you," Arthur murmured into my hair, his arms tightening. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, but then he froze. The relief shattered. Arthur went completely rigid against my back. His nose brushed against the swollen, inflamed skin over my mating gland, and the scent of the black market suppressants must have finally hit him. What is this?" Arthur demanded. He spun me around, gripping my shoulders to keep me upright. His eyes were wide, horrified. He brushed my collar aside before I could stop him, exposing the angry, bruised flesh of my neck. "Leo, what have you been taking?" I slapped his hand away and stumbled backward, putting distance between us. The pain rushed back in tenfold, making my vision swim. "What I can afford," I spat, gasping for breath. "Since you didn't have the decency to formally sever the bond before you moved your new toy in." "I never filed the severance because I never wanted to break the bond," Arthur shouted, his composure finally snapping. The sound echoed down the alley, startling a stray cat near the dumpsters. "I never wanted any of this." "Then why did you do it?" I yelled back, my throat burning. "Why did you bring him into my home?" Arthur opened his mouth. I saw the words forming on his tongue, saw the desperate need to explain. But before he could speak, the gallery door cracked open again. "Arthur." Tristan stepped into the alley. He had thrown a cashmere coat over his shoulders, looking like a porcelain doll misplaced in the grime of the city. He looked at Arthur, then at me, and his eyes narrowed. "The curator is asking for you," Tristan said. His voice was smooth, but the underlying command was unmistakable. It wasn't a request. Arthur closed his mouth. The fight drained out of him in a single agonizing second. He looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes, and then he took a step back, toward Tristan. I let out a harsh, dry laugh. It sounded like scraping metal. "Have a good night, Mr. Pierce," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the street. I flagged down a passing cab, climbed into the back, and gave the driver my address. As the car pulled away, I looked out the rear window. Arthur was still standing in the alley, watching the taillights fade into the dark, with Tristan's hand firmly anchored to his arm. I didn't make it to my apartment. I paid the cab driver in cash, stepped out onto the curb in front of my building, and the world simply tilted on its axis. The pavement rushed up to meet me. I felt the impact on my shoulder, heard a dull thud, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling wasn't the water-stained plaster of my shoebox apartment. It was a grid of harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of iodine, bleach, and stale coffee. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to obey. My limbs felt like they were filled with wet cement. A low, rhythmic beeping sounded to my left. "Don't move!" The voice was gruff. I rolled my head to the side. Cole was sitting in a plastic chair, drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup. He looked worse than I felt. "Where am I?" I croaked. "Basement clinic in the Iron Ward," Cole replied, setting the cup down. "You passed out on the sidewalk. A neighbor saw you and called me. Good thing, too. Your temperature was 104. I closed my eyes. The Iron Ward was a notorious district on the edge of the city, known for its gray market medical facilities. It was where people went when they couldn't afford a real hospital, or when they needed questions not to be asked. "The suppressants," I started. "Are killing you," a new voice interrupted. A doctor walked into the small curtained alcove. She looked exhausted, wearing a stained white coat over a t-shirt. She picked up a clipboard from the end of my bed. You've been taking street-grade chemical dampeners for months, the doctor said, not bothering with bedside manner. They've masked the symptoms, but they haven't stopped the biological rejection. Your mating gland is necrotizing, Leo. The tissue is literally dying. A cold wave of terror washed over me, piercing through the fog of exhaustion. What does that mean? It means your body is treating the broken bond as a systemic infection, she explained bluntly. If we don't surgically sever the nerve connections and remove the damaged tissue, the necrosis will spread to your spinal column. You'll be paralyzed, and then you'll die. Okay, I whispered. Do the surgery. The doctor looked at Cole, then back at me. The surgical fee is $20,000, up front. This isn't a charity clinic, and this is a high-risk microsurgery. You don't have insurance. I have $3,000 saved, I stammered, panic rising in my chest. I can get a loan. I can set up a payment plan. We don't do payment plans, she said, setting the clipboard down. I've stabilized you with medical-grade IV suppressants, but they'll only hold you for about 12 hours. You need the money by tonight, or I have to discharge you. She walked out of the alcove, the curtain swishing shut behind her. Silence descended on the small space, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. I stared at the ceiling. I was going to die. I was 26 years old, and I was going to die in a basement clinic because a billionaire decided he missed his ex-fiancée. The sheer absurdity of it made a hysterical bubble of laughter rise in my throat. I'll call him, Cole said, standing up. No, I snapped, the laughter dying instantly. Leo, don't be a stubborn idiot. This isn't about pride anymore. This is about your life. I said no, Cole. I turned my head to glare at him. I'd rather die than beg Arthur Pierce for my life. You won't have to beg, Cole said quietly, because I already called him. My heart hammered against my ribs. You did what? When I found you on the sidewalk, you were convulsing. I grabbed your phone. I guessed your password. It's your damn birth year. You're not a hacker. I found his number, and I told him you were dying. Cole crossed his arms, unapologetic. Fire me as a friend later. Right now, stay alive. Get out, I hissed, my chest heaving. Get out of here. Cole didn't argue. He just nodded, turning on his heel. As he pulled the curtain back to leave, a towering figure blocked his path. Arthur. He had lost the overcoat. His tie was gone, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked wildly out of place in the dingy gray market clinic. His eyes locked onto me, taking in the IV lines, the pale pallor of my skin, the heavy gauze taped over my neck. Cole slipped past him without a word. Arthur stepped into the alcove. The curtain fell shut. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the erratic, rapid beeping of my heart monitor. You didn't tell me, Arthur finally said. His voice was a ragged whisper. It's none of your business, I replied, turning my face away to stare at the blank wall. None of my business? Arthur closed the distance between us, grabbing the metal railing of the hospital bed. His knuckles were white. You are my mate. You are lying in a filthy basement clinic, dying from a severed bond, and you think it's none of my business? You broke the bond, I yelled, the anger finally overriding the exhaustion. I turned back to him, my voice echoing in the small space. You broke the nest. You moved him in. You chose him. I didn't choose him, Arthur roared back, his alpha presence flaring so violently it made the medical instruments on the tray rattle. The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and desperate. I paid the front desk, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a harsh, trembling octave. The surgeon is prepping an operating room now. You're getting the severance. I won't let them touch me if you pay for it. You don't have a choice. Arthur pulled a plastic chair close to the bed and collapsed into it. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. When he looked up, the formidable, untouchable Arthur Pierce was gone. I didn't choose him, Leo, Arthur said, the words bleeding out of him like a confession. I chose you. I chose your life. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words through the haze of the painkillers. "What are you talking about?" I asked slowly. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. "You asked me why I didn't put Tristan in a hotel, why I brought him to our home. Because he asked for you. That's what I told you. It was a lie." Arthur swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Tristan didn't come to me because he was sick. He came to me because he was running." Running from what? His mate, the one who left him. Arthur's mouth twisted into a bitter sneer. "His name is Viktor Volkov. He runs the largest unregulated lending syndicate on the East Coast. He's a monster, Leo, and Tristan belongs to him." The name sent a chill down my spine. Even in my secluded, pragmatic life, I knew who the Volkov syndicate was. They weren't just loan sharks. They were a cartel that trafficked in debt, flesh, and blackmail. "Tristan accrued a massive gambling debt," Arthur continued, his voice monotone, devoid of emotion. "He owed Volkov $10 million. When he couldn't pay, he tried to run. Volkov's men caught him. They broke his bond forcefully, a punitive severance. It's a torture tactic. They leave the Omega to rot from the inside out until they pay." I felt the blood drain from my face. I reached up instinctively, my fingers brushing the gauze over my own necrotizing gland. "So, he came to you to pay the debt?" "Yes, but it wasn't just a request for money." Arthur looked up, his amber eyes locking onto mine, burning with a dark, helpless fury. He had leverage. "What leverage could he possibly have on you?" Arthur was a billionaire. He had teams of lawyers, security firms, police commissioners on speed dial. Extorting him wasn't just difficult, it was suicidal. He had photos, Leo, financial records, schedules. Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not of me. Of you." The heart monitor spiked. "Beep, beep, beep." "Tristan knew he couldn't threaten me directly," Arthur said. "So he researched you. He found out where your sister goes to school. He found out what time you leave for work, the route you walk, the coffee shop you visit every Tuesday. He packaged it all up, handed it to Volkov's enforcers, and told them that if I didn't pay the debt and provide him sanctuary, they could take their $10 million out of your hide." The room seemed to shrink. The harsh fluorescent lights felt blinding. "He threatened to give you to the syndicate," Arthur said, his voice breaking, "unless I paid his debt and took him in to guarantee his safety. He demanded to live in my penthouse. He demanded my protection. He knew that if I told you the truth, you would run, and Volkov's men would track you down. You wouldn't have stood a chance." "So you lied to me," I whispered. "I had to." Arthur reached out, his hand hovering over mine on the hospital bed, trembling. "I had to make you hate me. I had to let you walk away thinking I was a monster so that Tristan would believe he had won. It was the only way to keep Volkov's men off you. If you were no longer my mate, if you were just a discarded Omega, you lost your value as a hostage. You let me leave." My voice was rising, a chaotic mix of relief, horror, and profound betrayal. "You let me move into a slum. You let me take street suppressants for 4 months. I am literally dying right now, Arthur, because of what you did." "I didn't know," Arthur shouted, slamming his fist against his own thigh. "I swear to God, Leo, I didn't know. I had security detailing watching your apartment building. I made sure Volkov's men never went near your neighborhood. I thought you were safe. I thought you would just hate me and move on. I didn't know you hadn't filed the medical severance. I didn't know you were rotting from the inside." He finally closed the distance, grabbing my hand. His grip was desperate, anchoring him as much as me. I didn't pull away. I didn't have the strength. "Every day with him in that house is a nightmare," Arthur whispered, tears finally breaking free, tracking down his hollowed cheeks. He plays the victim for the cameras, and behind closed doors he reminds me that if I step out of line, he makes one phone call to Volkov. "I traded my life for yours, Leo. I would do it 1,000 times over, but I never meant to kill you in the process." The anger that had sustained me for 4 months evaporated, leaving behind a crushing, devastating exhaustion. The narrative I had built, the cynical story of the billionaire choosing his beautiful first love over the boring, pragmatic mate, was ash. Arthur didn't discard me. He had thrown himself on a grenade to save me. Before I could say anything, before I could even begin to process the magnitude of the lie we had been living, the alcove curtain was ripped back. The doctor stood there, flanked by 2 nurses. "Time's up," she said briskly, eyeing Arthur's grip on my hand. "The OR's ready. We need to move him now, Mr. Pierce. The necrosis is spreading." Arthur stood up, his jaw set. The broken man vanished, replaced once again by the ruthless, unyielding alpha who tore down corporations for a living. He leaned over, pressing his forehead against mine. "Live," Arthur ordered, his voice vibrating with absolute command. "Survive this surgery, Leo, because when you wake up, I'm going to burn Tristan and the Volkov syndicate to the ground." He stepped back. The nurses unhooked my bed and began wheeling me down the sterile, white hallway toward the operating theater. I watched Arthur shrink in the distance until the double doors swung shut, sealing me in the cold quiet of the surgical wing. The cynical voice in my head was finally silent. There was only the steady hum of the anesthesia machine and the terrifying realization that my life was no longer my own. It belonged to the war Arthur was about to start. Waking up from the severance surgery was not a cinematic gasp for air. It was a slow, grueling crawl through layers of thick, chemically induced sludge. The first thing I registered was the absence of pain. The relentless, toxic burning at the base of my neck that had been my constant companion for 4 months was gone. In its place was a heavy, cold numbness. The second thing I registered was the silence. For a bonded Omega, the mind is never entirely quiet. There is always a low-frequency hum in the background, a biological radar pinging the existence and emotional state of your mate. Even when Arthur and I were fighting, even when I hated him, that hum was there. It was the tether. Now, the radar was dead. The screen was blank. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was still the same grid of harsh fluorescent lights, but the room was different. It wasn't the dingy curtained alcove anymore. It was a private recovery room. The walls were painted a sterile, calming beige. A massive bouquet of white lilies sat on the bedside table, their scent entirely absent to my ruined olfactory senses. I reached up with a heavy, uncoordinated hand and touched the thick bandage wrapping my throat. There was a hollow crater where the swollen gland used to be. The nerve endings had been cauterized. The biological bridge was burned. I was no longer Arthur Pierce's mate. I was just Leo. Biologically speaking, I was an island. The door opened with a soft click. Cole walked in. He looked exactly the same, rumpled flannel shirt, dark circles under his eyes, holding a bruised apple. He stopped at the foot of the bed and took a bite, chewing slowly as he assessed me. "You're awake," Cole noted, his voice rough. "Unfortunately," I rasped. My throat felt like it had been scoured with steel wool. "How long?" 3 days. They kept you under. The necrosis was deeper than they thought. The surgeon had to dig." Cole tossed the apple core into a metal waste bin in the corner. It hit the bottom with a loud clang. "She said if you had waited another 12 hours, you'd be paralyzed from the neck down. Congratulations on surviving your own stubbornness." I let my head fall back against the pillows. 3 days. "Where is he?" I didn't have to specify. Cole pulled a chair up to the side of the bed and slumped into it. "Gone. He paid the clinic for a month of private recovery, hired a pair of very large, very quiet men in dark suits to stand outside your door, and vanished. But if you want to know what he's doing, just turn on the television." Cole reached for the remote on the nightstand and flicked on the flat screen mounted on the wall. He switched it to a local financial news network. The screen displayed a sleek graphic of the Pierce Holdings logo, right next to a glaring red ticker tape of plummeting stock prices for a commercial real estate conglomerate I didn't recognize. The anchor, a beta woman with sharp features and a severe haircut, was speaking rapidly. A stunningly aggressive hostile takeover bid by Arthur Pierce. In the last 48 hours, Pierce Holdings has systematically targeted shell companies widely rumored to be associated with the Volkov syndicate, leveraging billions to force liquidations. The SEC is reportedly scrambling to keep up with the sheer volume of Pierce's acquisitions, while several prominent figures tied to Volkov's unregulated lending networks have been handed over to federal prosecutors by anonymous whistleblowers. Cole muted the television. "He's not just going after them with lawyers," Cole said quietly. "He's buying their debts. He's freezing their supply chains. He bought the logistics company Volkov uses to smuggle cash across state lines and immediately dissolved it, firing everyone and locking the warehouses. He's drowning them in their own money." I stared at the muted screen, watching the stock graphs plummet. Money is a weapon. When you have $1 billion, you don't need a gun. You can erase a man's existence with a fountain pen and a wire transfer. Arthur was systematically dismantling an organized crime syndicate not with bullets, but with sheer, unadulterated financial violence. "And Tristan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cole let out a dark chuckle. "The fragile little bird. The tabloids are having a field day. Arthur kicked him out of the penthouse yesterday. Literally had his security throw his designer luggage onto the sidewalk. Tristan tried to run to the press, claim Arthur was abusing him, but Arthur released the security footage of Tristan coordinating with Volkov's enforcers. It's a federal extortion case now. The feds are looking for him. Volkov's people are looking for him. The kid is radioactive." I closed my eyes. The phantom itch at the base of my neck flared. A ghost of a Bond crying out for a man who was currently burning the city to the ground in my name. "He did all of it for you," Cole pointed out, leaning forward. "He played the villain so you wouldn't be the hostage. That's a hell of a thing, Leo." "It doesn't change the fact that I'm lying here with a hole in my neck," I replied, the pragmatism settling heavily into my bones. "He saved my life, Cole, but the Bond is dead. Biology doesn't care about his intentions. It just knows the connection is gone." Cole didn't argue. He just nodded, a grim understanding settling over his features. "So, what now?" "Now," I said, staring at the muted television screen. "I heal, and I wait." Healing was a brutal, unglamorous process. The physical therapy to regain full mobility in my neck and shoulders involved hours of agonizing repetition. My body was learning how to function without the constant influx of alpha pheromones regulating my nervous system. I had night sweats. I had tremors. But every day, the fog lifted a little more. My mind became razor sharp, cleared of the heavy, depressive sludge of the black market suppressants. 2 weeks into my recovery, the quiet of the clinic was shattered. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, reading a paperback novel, when the heavy oak door of my room burst open. The 2 security guards Arthur had hired were struggling to hold back a thrashing, frantic figure. It was Tristan. The pristine, fragile porcelain doll was gone. He looked entirely deranged. His spun gold hair was matted and greasy. His designer coat was stained with coffee and grime. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically around the room wide with primal terror. He smelled like sour orchids and rotting fear, a scent so pungent it managed to break through my damaged olfactory receptors. "Let him in," I told the guards, my voice calm, projecting a steady authority I hadn't felt in months. The guards exchanged a glance but released their grip. Tristan stumbled into the room gasping for breath, nearly tripping over his own feet. The guards stepped back out, closing the door firmly behind them, trapping the 2 of us inside. Tristan stared at me. He looked at the thick white bandage wrapped around my neck, and a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or just the realization that his leverage was permanently gone, crossed his face. "He's going to kill me," Tristan gasped, wrapping his arms around his own thin frame, shivering violently. "Volkov. He's going to kill me, Leo. Please, you have to call Arthur. You have to tell him to stop." I carefully placed a bookmark in my novel and set it on the side table. I didn't stand up. I just watched him. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because Arthur is destroying everything." Tristan's voice pitched upward, cracking hysterically. He froze Volkov's offshore accounts. He handed Volkov's lieutenant to the FBI. Volkov thinks I gave Arthur the financial records. He put a bounty on my head. I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm hiding in subway stations. Please. Arthur will listen to you. If you tell him to back off, he will. You came into my home, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. You used my life as a bargaining chip for your gambling debts. You watched me pack my bags and walk out into the cold, knowing you were forcing my mate to abandon me to keep me alive. You smiled at me at that gallery while I was rotting from the inside out. Tristan shrank back, tears spilling over his eyelashes. I was desperate. Volkov forcefully severed my bond. Do you know what that feels like? To have your biology ripped out of you by a back-alley butcher? I slowly raised a hand and tapped the thick gauze on my throat. Tristan's mouth clicked shut. I know exactly what it feels like, I said, the coldness in my voice surprising even me. The difference is, you put yourself in that chair to pay for your own mistakes. I was put in this bed to pay for yours. Tristan dropped to his knees. The graceful, aristocratic Omega was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered animal begging for its life. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you would get sick. I just needed to survive. Please, Leo, I'm begging you, just make one phone call. I looked down at him. A year ago, I might have felt pity. I might have seen a broken Omega and tried to help. But the severance surgery doesn't just remove the mating gland. It removes the biological imperative to submit, to soothe, to compromise. It leaves behind nothing but pure, unadulterated human choice. And I chose not to care. The security guards outside are going to escort you out, I said quietly. If you try to come back here, I will press charges for trespassing. Where you go from here, and what Volkov does to you, is entirely your problem. You wanted Arthur's attention, Tristan. You got it. Deal with the consequences. Tristan stared at me, his mouth open in a silent scream of despair. He tried to scramble forward, reaching for my hospital gown. Guards, I called out, raising my voice just a fraction. The door opened instantly. The 2 large men in suits stepped in. They didn't speak. They simply grabbed Tristan by the arms, lifted him entirely off the floor, and dragged him backward. Tristan thrashed, screaming my name, sobbing hysterically as they hauled him out into the corridor. The door clicked shut. The silence returned. I picked up my paperback novel, found my page, and continued to read. The sour scent of fear lingered in the room for a few hours, but eventually the air filtration system cycled it out, leaving behind nothing at all. A month later, the war ended. I was sitting in my new apartment. It wasn't a shoebox in a slum, and it wasn't a penthouse in the sky. It was a comfortable, quiet 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. I paid for it with my own money, a settlement payout Arthur's lawyers had aggressively negotiated with the clinic that originally misdiagnosed my withdrawal symptoms. I had a job lined up at a logistics firm, a real job, managing supply chains, using the sharp, pragmatic skills I had always possessed. It was a Tuesday evening. The news was playing quietly on the television in the background. Viktor Volkov had been indicted on 74 counts of racketeering, extortion, and trafficking. His syndicate was in ashes, its assets seized by the federal government. Tristan had taken a plea deal, turning state's witness in exchange for placement in a witness protection program. He would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder in a mundane suburban town, stripped of his wealth, his status, and his alpha. The doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I opened the door. The heavy, imposing silence on the other side of the wood was a dead giveaway. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Arthur stood in the hallway. The bespoke suit was immaculate, the amber eyes sharp and piercing, but the billionaire armor was cracked. He looked older. The hollows in his cheeks were still there, and there was a new, stark exhaustion settled deep in his bones. He didn't smell like burnt cedar and panic anymore. He just smelled like a man who had walked through hell and finally found the exit. "You're looking better," Arthur said. His voice was a low, rough rumble. "So are you," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't invite him in. Arthur looked at the scar on my neck. The bandages were gone, leaving a jagged, pink starburst of healed tissue over the hollow crater where my mating gland used to be. I saw his jaw clench, a muscle feathering wildly against his cheek. The guilt in his eyes was absolute, a heavy, crushing weight that he would carry for the rest of his life. "It's over," Arthur said, meeting my gaze. "Volkov is in federal custody. The syndicate is dismantled. Tristan is gone. They will never touch you. You are completely safe." "I know. I saw the news." Arthur nodded slowly. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his tailored trousers. For a man who usually commanded boardrooms and terrified CEOs, he looked entirely lost standing in my hallway. "I came to give you these," Arthur said. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his inner jacket pocket and held it out. I took it, opening the clasp. Inside were the original deeds to the penthouse, a transfer of assets for a significant portion of Pierce Holdings' stock, and the legal documentation of my complete medical and financial independence. "I don't want your money, Arthur," I said, sighing heavily. "It's not a buyout, Leo. It's restitution." Arthur's voice was fiercely earnest. "It's yours. Do what you want with it. Burn it, donate it, build an empire with it. But you will never have to worry about a medical bill or a slum landlord again." I looked at the papers, then back at him. The silence stretched between us, thick and unresolved. The biological pull that used to dictate our interactions was completely dead. When I looked at Arthur now, my heart didn't race. My instincts didn't scream to submit or to comfort. He was just a man. A deeply flawed, incredibly dangerous, fiercely protective man who had made a catastrophic error in judgment to save my life. "I'm sorry," Arthur whispered, the words carrying the weight of a confession. "I broke your nest, I broke your trust, and I broke your body. I know an apology doesn't fix a severed bond. I know I can't undo it. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single second." He took a step back, preparing to leave. He was doing what he thought was right. He had secured my safety, provided for my future, and now he was going to walk away to let me heal in peace. "Arthur." He stopped, his hand hovering over the elevator button in the hallway. He looked back at me, hope and terror warring in his amber eyes. "The bond is gone," I said, stepping out of the doorway and into the hall. I walked up to him. We were standing mere inches apart. "If you try to use your alpha voice on me, it won't work. If I get angry, my scent won't soothe you. Biology isn't going to hold us together anymore." Arthur swallowed hard, looking down at me. "I know. If we do this," I said, my voice steady, pragmatic, and entirely my own, "it's not because we are fated mates. It's not because some gland in my neck tells me I have to stay. It's because we choose to, every single day. No secrets, no martyrs, no hostages." Arthur's breath hitched. He reached out, his large hand trembling as it hovered over my shoulder, terrified to cross the boundary. I didn't wait for his instinct to kick in. I reached up, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit, and pulled him down. When our lips met, there was no explosion of pheromones. There was no biological clicking of locks, no sudden, overwhelming rush of primal mating instincts. It was just skin against skin, the warmth of his breath, the solid grounding weight of his hands finally wrapping around my waist. It was messy, it was human, and it was entirely real. We didn't have a fairy tale. The billionaire and the fated mate narrative had burned to ash in a dingy alleyway months ago. We were broken, scarred, and entirely unbonded. But as Arthur held me, burying his face in my neck right over the jagged scar that saved my life, I realized something. A bond forced by biology is just survival, but a bond forged by choice, built on the ashes of everything that tried to destroy it, that is unbreakable. What did you think of Leo and Arthur's ending? True strength isn't just in walking away. Sometimes it's in choosing to rebuild without the safety net of fate. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment from this story, and let me know if you want to see more grounded, gritty Omegaverse tales that break the cliches. If this story kept you hooked, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next audio drama. Your support keeps these stories alive.